I was already in my car, GPS locked onto the address of the notary's office, when my husband's phone lit up on the passenger seat. He'd asked me to bring it because he said he might need to confirm some banking details remotely. I remember thinking how considerate that was, how organized, how thoughtful. That was so like Marcus, always 2 steps ahead. The notification sat there on the screen, face up, impossible to miss. It wasn't a banking alert. It wasn't a work email. It was a message from someone named Becca, and the preview said, word for word, "Did she sign yet? When can we move in?" I sat in that parking lot outside Starbucks for 47 seconds. I counted. I know because I was staring at the little clock on the dashboard and watching the numbers tick forward while my brain tried to catch up with what my eyes had already understood. Then I put the car in reverse, turned around, and drove home. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I just drove and thought, and by the time I pulled back into our driveway, I already knew exactly what I was going to do. But let me back up, because to understand why what happened next felt so devastating, and then, honestly, so deeply satisfying, you need to understand what I thought I had, what I had spent years building, and what I had almost handed over because I loved someone who turned out to be an extraordinarily good liar. My name is Ashley. I'm 34 years old, and up until about 8 months ago, I would have described my life as genuinely good. Not perfect, not Instagram-filtered perfect, but the kind of real, earned, solid good that you appreciate more when you're older because you remember what it felt like to not have it. I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Columbus, Ohio, with my mom, Linda, and my younger sister, Kayla. My dad left when I was 9, and my mom worked double shifts at a hospital laundry facility for most of my childhood. She never complained. She just worked. I watched her do that every single day, and I told myself that when I grew up, I was going to build something stable, something that couldn't just walk out the door. I put myself through Ohio State with a combination of scholarships, Pell Grants, and part-time work at a campus cafe. I graduated with a degree in accounting, passed my CPA exam on the first try, and landed a position at a mid-size firm in downtown Columbus. By the time I was 28, I was a senior associate. By 30, I had bought my own apartment. That apartment, a 2-bedroom unit on the 4th floor of a building in the Short North neighborhood, was the thing I was most proud of in my entire adult life. I had saved for the down payment for 4 years, $43,000, mostly in a dedicated savings account I called The Future in my banking app. I'd refinanced once and gotten a great rate. I knew every line of that mortgage statement by heart. The building had an HOA that was actually well managed. The neighbors were decent, and from my living room window on clear days, you could see a sliver of the Columbus skyline between 2 taller buildings. I used to sit there in the mornings with my coffee and just feel settled, like I had earned my square footage in this world. I met Marcus at a work event. He was a client at the time, technically. His small construction supply company used our firm for tax preparation. He wasn't supposed to be my type. He was loud in a room, always making people laugh, always the guy who somehow knew the bartender. I was quieter, more measured, but there was something about the way he looked at me that first night that made me feel like I was the most interesting person he'd ever been stuck in a conversation with. He asked questions. He remembered the answers. When I mentioned offhandedly that I liked a particular author, he texted me 2 weeks later to say he'd read one of her books and wanted to know what I thought about the ending. I fell for it completely. Looking back, I can see that. But at the time, it just felt like, finally someone who paid attention. We dated for 2 years. They were good years. We traveled together, a long weekend in Nashville, a full week in Colorado that fall, a trip to Savannah that Marcus surprised me with for my 31st birthday. He was generous with his time and with his affection, and I genuinely thought I knew him. We talked about everything: money, family, the future. He knew about my dad leaving. He knew about my mom's double shifts. He knew exactly what that apartment meant to me because I'd told him. When he proposed, we were sitting on the couch in my apartment, watching a terrible reality show and eating Thai food out of the containers. He didn't make a production of it. He just paused the TV, looked at me and said, "I want this to be my life. You, this couch, bad television. I want it forever. Will you marry me?" The ring was in the pocket of his sweatpants. It was a little squashed from sitting there for apparently 3 hours while he waited for the right moment. I said yes before he even finished getting it out of his pocket. We got married the following June. Small ceremony, backyard of a rented farmhouse about 40 minutes outside the city. 60 guests. My mom cried through the whole thing. Kayla was my maid of honor and gave a speech that made everyone laugh and then immediately tear up. Marcus's family drove in from Pittsburgh, his parents, his brother Derek, a handful of cousins. His dad Frank shook my hand and said, "You're the best thing that's ever happened to that boy." And I believed him completely because why wouldn't I? We moved into a rental house in Westerville after the wedding, a 3-bedroom place with a decent yard and a 2-car garage. Marcus said it made more sense financially to keep my apartment as an investment property and rent it out while we figured out our longer-term plan. That sounded smart to me. It sounded like the kind of thing a financially responsible couple does. I found a tenant, a grad student named Owen who was quiet and paid on time, and we settled into our married life in the Westerville house. The first 18 months were good, genuinely good. We had routines that I loved: Saturday morning farmer's market, Sunday dinner that Marcus almost always cooked because he was honestly a better cook than me, Friday night walks around the neighborhood that started as a health thing and turned into the time we actually talked about everything important. I was happy. I was present in my life in a way I hadn't been in a long time. Marcus's business, Harmon Supply Company, named after his grandmother's maiden name, was doing decently, not explosively but steadily. He had 3 employees, a warehouse lease on the east side, and a handful of reliable contractors he supplied regularly. He talked about expansion sometimes, about wanting to add a commercial flooring line, about possibly bringing on a sales rep. I helped him with his books occasionally, just informally, because accounting was my thing, and it was genuinely easier for me to look at a QuickBooks file for an hour than it was for him to untangle it himself. I never saw anything alarming in those books. I want to say that clearly, because later I would spend a lot of time wondering if I'd missed something obvious. I hadn't. The numbers were normal, modest, but normal. The first sign that something had shifted came on a Tuesday evening in early October, about 22 months into our marriage. I came home from work to find Marcus sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open and a look on his face that I can only describe as carefully constructed calm. The kind of calm that takes effort, the kind that means the opposite of calm is happening underneath. "Hey," I said, dropping my bag by the door. "You okay?" "Yeah," he said. "Just work stuff." I poured myself a glass of water and looked at him again. "What kind of work stuff?" He closed the laptop. "One of my main contractors, Riverside Builders. They're pulling back on their orders. Apparently, they've got some cash flow issues of their own." He said it lightly, like it was a minor inconvenience. "How much of your business is Riverside?" I asked, because I'm an accountant, and that's the first question that comes to mind. He hesitated. Just a fraction of a second. "Maybe 30%, he said. 30% is significant, I said. "I know," he said, "but I've got some leads. It'll be fine." I believed him. Of course I believed him. He was my husband, and he had never given me a reason not to. And sometimes businesses have rough patches, and you work through them. I made dinner, we watched TV, we went to bed. Normal Tuesday. But something sat in the back of my mind after that conversation. Something small and specific that I couldn't quite name. It was the half-second pause before he answered my question about Riverside's percentage. The way he'd already had the laptop closed before I'd even asked anything. The way his eyes had gone just slightly, just the tiniest fraction, to the left when he said, "Maybe 30%. I was an accountant. I noticed numbers. But I was also, apparently, a person who noticed pauses. I didn't act on it that night. I filed it away and told myself I was overthinking. But that small, specific thing stayed with me, quiet and patient, like it was waiting for the right moment to matter. It didn't have to wait very long. The weeks that followed that Tuesday conversation felt like watching a slow leak in a tire. Nothing dramatic, Nothing you could point to and say, "There, that's the moment it all went wrong." Just a gradual, almost imperceptible loss of pressure. Marcus started staying later at the warehouse. He stopped cooking Sunday dinners. Our Friday night walks became every other Friday, and then once a month, and then not at all. He was distracted in a way that read as stress, and because I loved him and because I understood what business pressure felt like, I gave him space. I made dinner. I left him alone with his laptop. I told myself this was what marriage looked like during hard times. You showed up quietly. You didn't demand. You waited. He came to me on a Wednesday evening in late November with actual tears in his eyes. Not the kind of tears that creep up on a person unexpectedly, the kind that arrive prepared. He sat down across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd told me about Riverside Builders, and he put both hands flat on the surface, like he needed something solid to hold on to. "Ash," he said, "I have to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out before you say anything." My stomach dropped. I set down my fork. "Okay." "The business is in serious trouble. I've been trying to handle it quietly because I didn't want to stress you out, but it's gotten to a point where I can't fix it on my own." His voice broke on the word fix. Genuinely broke. I remember that. I remember thinking, he's really scared. I owe back payments on the warehouse lease. I've got 2 suppliers threatening to pull my accounts. My operating line of credit is maxed out. He looked up at me. "I need about $90,000 to get through this. And Ashley, I don't have it." The number hit me like a physical thing. 90,000, I said. I know. I've looked at everything. My 401k is already half gone from when I reinvested 2 years ago. There's nothing liquid. There's no other way." And then he said it, quietly, like he hated himself for saying it. "The only asset we have that could cover this is your apartment." I went very still. "I'm not saying we lose it forever," he said quickly. "I'm saying we sell it, stabilize the business, and then in a year, 18 months, we buy something together. Something that's ours, not just yours. I know what that apartment means to you. I know your mom knows about it. I know you saved for years. That's why I'm asking instead of just—" He stopped, wiped his eye with the back of his hand. "I'm asking because I respect you, and because I need you." I looked at my husband across that table, and I felt something I can only describe as a pulling, like something in my chest being stretched in 2 directions at once. And I said, "Let me think about it." I thought about it for 12 days. I asked him detailed questions about the business finances. He showed me documents, profit and loss statements, the lease agreement, a letter from one of the suppliers. The numbers were tight but coherent. They told a plausible story. I was an accountant. I read them carefully. I didn't see anything obviously wrong. Later I would understand that was because the documents were not real. They were good fakes, but they were fakes, and he had known that I would look at them, and he had prepared accordingly. But at the time I read them and I believed them, because I believed him. On day 13, I called a realtor named Sandra, who had helped me find the apartment originally, and told her I was thinking about listing. She ran comps and told me it would likely sell for somewhere between $212,000 and $220,000. Even after paying off the remaining mortgage balance, I would clear close to $140,000, more than enough. I cried on the phone with Sandra. She was professional and kind about it. She said, "You can always buy again." I knew she was right. I also knew that wasn't really the point. I told Marcus yes. He hugged me for a long time. He said he would never forget this. He said I was the most generous person he had ever known. He said when we got through this, he was going to spend the rest of his life making it up to me. I held on to him, and I thought, this is what you do for someone you love when they need you. The closing was scheduled for a Thursday morning. Sandra had found a buyer quickly, an all-cash offer, no contingencies, clean deal. The notary's office was about 12 minutes from our house. Marcus asked me to bring his phone because he said he might need to confirm banking details for the proceeds transfer. I remember he kissed me before I left, told me he loved me, told me everything was going to be okay. I had his phone on the passenger seat. I was 4 minutes from the notary's office, stopped at a light near a Starbucks when it lit up with that message from Becca. Did she sign yet? When can we move in? I pulled into the Starbucks parking lot. I sat there for 47 seconds. And then I unlocked Marcus's phone. I knew his passcode because he'd given it to me once when he asked me to look something up while he was driving. He'd never changed it. That was his first mistake. His second was not turning off notification previews. His third, and this was the one that really cost him, was keeping his entire conversation thread with Becca in the same phone he'd asked me to carry. I read it all. It took about 9 minutes. My hands were completely steady the entire time. That surprised me a little. Becca's full name, I learned, was Rebecca Simmons. She and Marcus had been together, based on the timestamps I was reading, for at least 14 months. They had an apartment already picked out, a 2-bedroom in Grandview Heights, $1,850 a month. She had sent him the listing. He had responded with a string of heart emojis and written, "Once the apartment sells, we'll have more than enough. Be patient, babe." There were messages discussing timelines. There were messages that I am not going to repeat here because even now, 2 years later, they are not things I want to put words to. There were messages making fun of me. One, specifically, where Marcus wrote, "She actually cried talking to the realtor. She makes it so easy. She makes it so easy." I read that sentence 3 times. I felt something cold and clean settle over me. Not grief. There would be time for grief later. What I felt in that parking lot was clarity. Absolute, surgical, crystalline clarity. I put the car in reverse and drove home. Marcus was at the kitchen table with his laptop open when I walked through the door. He looked up with a smile that dropped the second he registered my expression. "Hey, shouldn't you be at the—" "Sit down," I said. I was still standing in the doorway. "Don't get up. Don't say anything yet." "Ashley, what?" I said don't. I walked to the table and set his phone face up in front of him. The conversation with Becca was still open on the screen. I read it. All of it. So before you decide what version of this you want to perform for me, understand that there is no version. I know. The color left his face. I watched it happen in real time, the blood just draining, like someone had pulled a plug. "Ashley, don't," I said again. "I'm not here to fight with you. I'm not here to cry or scream or give you a chance to explain. I'm here to tell you that I did not sign those papers. The closing did not happen. And now I'm going to make 3 phone calls." I made the first one right there at the table, with him watching. I called Sandra. "Sandra," I said, "I need to pull the listing. Today, effective immediately. I'll explain later, but the sale is off." Sandra, bless her, asked 0 questions and said she'd handle it within the hour. Marcus stood up. "Ashley, you don't understand. If you pull that sale, I lose everything. Sit down." He sat. I made the second call to a divorce attorney named Patricia Cole, whose number I had looked up in the Starbucks parking lot in the same 9 minutes I'd spent reading his messages. Patricia had a same-day consultation opening at 2 p.m. I took it. Marcus was crying by then. Real tears this time, I think, though at that point the distinction no longer mattered to me. "Please," he said, "please just let me explain. Becca, it was a mistake. It was stupid. I was scared about the business and I made terrible choices. And I know I don't deserve it, but please." "Marcus," I said. I looked at him very directly. "The business isn't failing, is it?" A long pause. He looked at the table. "Is it?" I said again. "No," he said, very quietly. "No, it's not. The documents you showed me were fabricated." He didn't answer. Which was an answer. "You needed me to sell my apartment so you and Becca could have a down payment on a life together. And you used my love for you as the mechanism." I picked up his phone from the table and put it in my purse. "I'm keeping this for my attorney. You can get a new one." I walked to the bedroom and I packed a bag. Not for me, for him. I knew the house was a rental in both our names, but I also knew that I was the one who had actually been paying rent from my own account because Marcus had said his funds were tied up. I had documentation of every payment. I put his bag by the front door and I said, "I have an attorney appointment at 2. I would like you to be gone before I get back." "Where am I supposed to go?" he said. "I would try Becca," I said, "although I suspect the Grandview Heights apartment is going to be a little harder to finance now." I left. Patricia Cole was exactly what I needed her to be: direct, thorough, and unsentimental. I brought Marcus's phone. I had screenshots of the entire conversation with Becca. Patricia looked at the fabricated business documents I'd photographed and told me they might actually rise to the level of fraud, given that I had been induced to take financial action based on false representations. She said we could pursue that angle or simply use it as leverage in the divorce settlement. I told her I wanted the apartment protected, the rental income from the previous 2 years properly accounted for, and I wanted it done cleanly. She said, "I can do that." Within 72 hours she had filed. Marcus was served at his brother Derek's house in Pittsburgh, where he'd apparently gone because Becca, upon learning the apartment sale had fallen through, had told him she needed space to process. That information came to me secondhand through Derek's wife Carol, who texted me to say she was sorry and that she'd never trusted Marcus as far as she could throw him. I thanked her. She was one of the good ones. The divorce took 8 months. It was not pleasant and it was not simple, but it was, ultimately, clean. The apartment remained mine, entirely mine, not a marital asset in dispute, because I had purchased it before the marriage and had documentation proving every mortgage payment came from my premarital accounts. Marcus got a settlement that amounted to essentially nothing, because there was essentially nothing to split. The rental house in Westerville had been in my name on the lease. His business was, in fact, doing fine. Patricia's forensic review of the actual QuickBooks files, which she subpoenaed, showed Harmon Supply Company was operating with a healthy margin. That finding was presented to the court with the fabricated documents alongside it. The judge's expression when she reviewed the comparison was something I will carry with me for a long time. Marcus did not get the apartment. He did not get a chunk of my savings. He did not get to move to Grandview Heights with Becca, who had by then, according to what I heard from Carol, moved on to someone else entirely. What Marcus got was a divorce decree, a significantly damaged credit score from the legal fees he had to finance himself, and a reputation in the Columbus business community that had taken a meaningful hit once the fraud angle became part of the court record. He tried to reach me once, about 4 months after everything was finalized. A text message. It said, "I know I don't deserve anything from you, but I just wanted you to know I'm sorry. I think about what I did every day." I read it. I thought about it for about 3 seconds. Then I blocked the number. My mom, Linda, found out the full story the same week the divorce was finalized. I drove to her apartment in Columbus, the same building where I'd grown up. She'd never left. And I sat at her kitchen table and told her everything. When I got to the part about the message from Becca and sitting in that Starbucks parking lot and turning the car around, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your father used to say you were too soft. I always knew he was wrong." I stayed for dinner. She made the chicken and rice she used to make when Kayla and I were kids. We ate and talked about other things. Kayla's new job, the neighbors, a TV show my mom had gotten hooked on. Normal things, good things. I moved back into my apartment 3 months after filing for divorce. Owen, my grad student tenant, had just finished his program and moved out, so the timing was almost eerie in how clean it was. I repainted the living room, the same warm cream it had been before, but fresh. I got a new couch. I rearranged the furniture so it felt like mine again in a way that was present tense, not past tense. And on the first clear morning after I moved back in, I made a cup of coffee and I sat in my living room by the window, and I looked at that sliver of Columbus skyline between the 2 taller buildings. I had almost given this away. I had almost handed over the most concrete thing I had ever built for myself because I loved someone who had studied exactly how to ask me for it. He had known about my dad. He had known about my mom's double shifts. He had known what the apartment meant, and he had used that knowledge like a key. But here's what he hadn't counted on. He'd also left his phone face up on my passenger seat. Some people call that luck. I call it the universe having a slightly dark sense of humor. Either way, I'll take it. The skyline looked exactly the same as it always had, small and distant and mine.